Well, as I mentioned earlier, the Prime Minister doesn't even have the gall to ban anti-Israel protests planned for the anniversary of the October 7 massacre, so it's hardly surprising he doesn't want to engage in diplomatic affairs. Iran's ambassador to Australia has written a lengthy tribute to Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah, calling him a remarkable leader. Now, Ahmad Saghedi said Nasrallah was a blessed martyr who had a dignified path to heaven and had described his leadership as an ongoing struggle against the vile entity of the Zionist regime. And here was Peter Dutton speaking about it earlier.
It's not his first time, and he's been warned by the government before. I think the comments from the Iranian ambassador are completely and utterly at odds with what is in our country's best interests, and the Prime Minister and the Foreign Minister should show the strength of character and expel him from our country.
Joining me now is Liberal MP Andrew Wallace. Andrew, appreciate your time. The Prime Minister said today that there is no connection between the decision not to expel the diplomat and Hezbollah paraphernalia being paraded on the streets. Is that a fair comment in your view?
Danica, absolutely, it is not a fair comment. This all comes back down to a fundamental failure of leadership of the Prime Minister. From the very top down and from the very beginning, from October 7, the Prime Minister has absolutely failed the Jewish people in Australia, and he's failed Israel and the Jewish people across the world. You know, when countries like our closest ally, the United States, have come out publicly in very, very strong support of Israel, the Prime Minister has been walking both sides of the street. He's been talking out of both sides of his mouth. On the one hand, he's trying to walk a very fine line in support of his Labor left and his Labor left members, particularly in Western Sydney, but he's also trying to be very careful about what he says in relation to not offending the Jewish community here. But, you know, look, I've been down to Melbourne a bit and I've spoken with a lot of Jews in Australia and internationally, and they feel fundamentally let down by the leadership of the Prime Minister and his lack of demonstrative support for Israel and the Jewish community in Australia.
And, you know, you mentioned there Western Sydney ministers. Where on earth is Tony Burke right now? You know, on Sunday he warned of visa cancellations for anyone found to be flying the Hezbollah flag. Then he told police to report protesters who are on visas, and yet no visas as of yet have been cancelled. Why is he feeding the media dribs and drabs but not taking any action?
Well, this is what Labor does, Danica. You know, for years I've listened to Peter Dutton say, don't look at what Labor says, look at what they do. And what Labor says that they're going to do and what they actually do are very often different things. The Prime Minister just simply is failing to lead, and it's no surprise that his senior ministers, particularly Tony Burke, who has a very strong Muslim community in his electorate, you know, he's going to be very, very careful about not upsetting those people. We know that there's got the Muslim Vote organisation that are mobilising against him in his own electorate, so they are very vulnerable. But the Labor Party cannot have it both ways. They can't walk both sides of the street. This is a matter of fundamentally, you know, what's right and what's wrong. Israel is a democratic ally of Australia, and they need all the friends they can get at the darkest hour. And they are not getting that show of support from Australia. They're not getting that show of support from our Prime Minister. You know, there's not a lot I agree with Paul Keating, Danica, on many things, but on this I do agree with him when he said, you change the government, you change the nation. And over the last 2.5 years, I'm really sad to say that this country is almost unrecognisable to what it was. We've got absolutely fundamental failures on foreign policy coming from the Prime Minister and Penny Wong down. And what we are seeing is a situation on our streets where people can feel like they can act with impunity. And if people feel like they can act with impunity, then they obviously feel like there are no consequences. I'm very concerned about the protests and demonstrations that are going to occur over the weekend. This is a time when we should all be wrapping our arms around the Jewish community 12 months after the horrendous event of October 7, and instead what we've got is protesters hitting the streets in what could only be seen as an attempt to inflame division. It's just so wrong. And why the Prime Minister is not coming out and condemning this, I just don't know.
It beggars belief. It's just a day for the Jewish community to remember those, and it is being hijacked by people who seemingly want to celebrate such an awful, awful atrocity. Liberal MP Andrew Wallace, great to have you on. Thank you for joining me this evening.
Thanks, Danica.